Alice Marie Johnson is enjoying her first days of freedom after spending more than 2 decades in prison.
I'm feeling no handcuffs, nothing on me. I'm free to hug my family. Yes. I'm free to live life. I'm free to start over.
Alice, what's next for you? You're home, you're here, you're free, and I know you said your life's going to be purposeful. So what is it going to be?
I plan on continuing to magnify this issue. I can't stop. I can't stop. My life is completely intertwined forever with those who are left behind. So it can't end here. Thank you so much for having me back again. I look out among this audience and I see so many people who I've met who I now call friend. So thank you. I love you. June will forever be my Jubilee month. It was on June the 6th, 2013, that I was granted clemency after serving 21 years, 7 months, and 6 days in a federal prison. I was convicted on October the 31st, 1996, Halloween. As I was being led from the courtroom, handcuffed by 2 agents, they whispered in my ear, "Trick or treat, trick or treat, trick or treat." I was a first-time nonviolent offender who was sentenced to life plus 25 years in prison. Even though I'd never sold or used drugs, I was what was called a telephone mule or an information mule. I passed telephone numbers to other defendants who were unseen and unknown to me. These same co-conspirators would go to trial and testify against me to receive lesser or no sentences at all. My sentence was dictated by the mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. I remember wondering, how does a person serve an additional 25 years after they've already completed a life sentence? My sentence was used as a deterrent to others who were later arrested, to encourage them to take a plea deal and not to go to trial, because you don't want to be like Alice Marie Johnson, who rolled the dice and came up with snake eyes when she went to trial, do you? I have to tell you this, I greatly regret my involvement in any criminal activities. No matter what my role was, I was wrong. My bad decisions and mistakes affected my entire family, especially my children and my elderly parents. My oldest daughter had just graduated from college as an electrical engineer. At a time when she should have been planning for her future and enjoying life, she had to step into the role of mother to her other siblings. My second daughter was also arrested with me. They used her to try to convince me as an inducement to get me to take a plea deal and not go to trial. When that didn't happen, they dropped all charges against my daughter, but not before she dropped out of college as a junior because of embarrassment. My oldest son was also a college student. He too dropped out of college after I was convicted one day before he turned 20. My youngest son, he struggled so much when I went to prison. He was a teenager, and he also had dreams of going to college. Instead, his life started spiraling out of control, and he ended up in prison also. That happens so often when a parent goes to prison and leave their children. That cycle of incarceration continues. I lost both of my parents while I was in prison, and I was not allowed to attend either one of their funerals because I had a life sentence. My family was broken because I was missing out of their lives. You see, when one person goes to prison, their entire family goes with them. My family did every single day of that 21 years, 7 months, and 6 days with me. If I could have gone back in time and made different decisions and different choices, I would have done exactly that. But I couldn't. I was told that I would take my last dying breath in a federal prison because my sentence was, in essence, an unexecuted sentence of death. That was a pretty dark thought. But once again, I had a choice to make. I could either embrace the darkness of hopelessness, or I could get up and light a candle. That light, that hope, my faith made me believe that it was possible to take this bad situation and turn it into something good. Prison is a lonely, lonely world in itself. We refer to the outside world beyond the razor wire fence as the free world. But I discovered that you could be free in prison, and you can be in prison but physically free. When I first arrived in prison, it didn't take me long to see an enormous amount of possibilities and potential locked away, untapped talent. Maybe, just maybe, I could help create good, and together we could change our world. The first thing that I knew had to happen was old mindsets had to change. One of the things that I heard so many women come into prison and say was, I came in by myself, I'm leaving by myself. But what they forgot about was the commas, what happens in between the coming in and the going out. The second thing I knew that had to change was they needed someone to tell them that they had value and that they had purpose. That because they had committed a crime didn't mean that they had to be a criminal. Those labels could be peeled off. Those labels could be taken off, and they could still make something out of their life, even while they were locked up. Third, they needed to get off the sidelines, stop being spectators, and become participators. That's where I needed to step in, because many of the women had no idea of even possessing talents. No one had ever told them anything except you're a failure. You're never going to amount to anything. It's going to be like this. You're going to continue to come in and out of prison. Your family was like that, and no one even cares about you anyway. How many times have I heard that? No one had ever invested in their lives. When I was 10 years old, I had to write a poem for one of my classes, and my teachers discovered that I actually had a talent that I could write. I started writing little mini plays also. When I came into prison, that gift that had laid dormant for so many years was stirred back up. I began writing and producing plays. I would do casting calls and ask for anyone who wants to make something beautiful. Anyone who has a gift, anyone who thinks that they can do anything, come. I'm not turning anyone down. Singers, actresses, dancers, prop makers, incredible costume designers, so many gifted women started emerging. You would not believe what took place on the compound. All of a sudden, women were not even walking with their heads down. They wanted me to say, "Good job, you did that good." And that, just telling someone that you did a good job or that you were perfect for this role changed things. I want to tell you about someone I met at one of those casting calls. I met this woman whose name was Nay. She was 5 feet, no inches tall, with a shaved head, and tattooed on the back of her head were these words, "Blank you." So anyone who was standing behind Nay and read that brazen message was, in essence, being given the bird. Nay was considered a troublemaker. She stayed in and out of the shoe, which you call the hole. She never smiled. I'd never seen her smile before. She seldom laughed. She wore sunglasses in the daytime, at night, on a rainy day, on a cloudy day, because she did not want you to look into her eyes. So when she showed up for casting call, everybody was moving to the side a little bit and looking at Nay a little funny because they didn't want to brush up against her because they know that a fight could jump off. When it came Nay's turn to sign up, she stepped up and she didn't even call me by name. She just said, "I'm here to help." And wow, did she help. Nay became one of the most dedicated and faithful people that I've worked with than anyone that I've met in my life. She had gifts. She could draw. And something else she could do, she could recognize other people that were too shy to come forward. Nay started having people ask her, "How did I sound?" They were asking for her advice. Ironically, that tattoo that Nay had on the back of her head became the exact opposite of who she became. She did care, and she changed so many women's lives for good. There was another group of women who I saw that were still on the sidelines, and those were women who had mental and physical challenges, not wanting to leave them behind either. I coordinated the very first ever Special Olympics for women in prison. If you could only have seen the joy on the faces of those women as they stepped up to get gold, bronze, and silver medals, and heard the applause for them from people who had sometimes looked at them a little sideways. But there was one more group that unless you sought this group out, you wouldn't even know that they existed. They were the women who were in hospice care, women whose sentences may not have been a life sentence, but turned into a death sentence. Many of those women had been abandoned years ago by their family, so they had no one. To die alone in a lonely place somehow takes away every single bit of dignity that a person has. So I went to hospice training and became a certified hospice volunteer so that I could sit with these women and bring them some comfort and care during their last days. I didn't want them to die alone. I wanted them to know that someone cares and I'm here for you, my sisters, because that's who they were. They were my sisters too. I'm so humble. Even when I think about what took place, I can see it flashing before my eyes. What took place on the day that I left prison. When I received the news that my clemency had been granted by the president, less than 2 hours later, I didn't know it was going to be that quick. I heard my name announced over the intercom. Alice Marie Johnson, report to R&D with all of your property. The cheer that went up in that place was crazy. There's 3 buildings. My building is in the middle. There's another building on the either side of me. But in all total, there were about 1,600 women on that compound. As I started walking down the stairs, this noise started getting louder and louder. It's like once they saw my face, once they saw me making those steps, the last step to hit outside, that noise became so loud, it sounded like 1 million fans in a football stadium cheering at the same time. I looked up, and in every single window, pressed against the bars, women were beating the bars and screaming my name. They started stomping the floor. The building seemed like they were shaking. It felt like an earthquake under my feet. I couldn't believe it. And when I made this motion, I grabbed my chest and I made the motion of throwing my heart to them. And the sound that went up then was truly deafening. With every step that I made to R&D, it got louder and louder. And I just started turning around, and they were beating up against those bars and crying. And it's like in one voice, I knew they were saying, they love me, they love you, I love you, Miss Alice. And they were saying, please don't forget about us. As I left the compound, I had to pass by a camp that housed about 250 women. I passed the same scene. Every woman and every guard was standing outside that prison, and they were clapping and applauding and crying and saying, I love you, Miss Alice. And the women were saying, please don't forget about us. And I have not forgotten about them. What I saw take place in that prison, I saw lives changed. As I mentored the women who had been there, we became family. I became aunt, I became grandmother, I became friend, I became sister. We became a community in prison, and I know that if I could see change in such a dark place, what could happen? What hinders us from seeing change during this darkness that we're experiencing right now in our country? It's not really darkness, because you hold the key. You are the light. I know that many of you probably still find it hard to believe that I didn't know who Kim Kardashian was. But I really didn't. I did a video op-ed that went viral. It was a little small company, internet company called Mike.com. And I'd already been speaking on different platforms while in prison. That's what you call favor. I was the only one they allowed to ever do that. I spoke at Yale, New York University, the University of Seattle and Washington, Google and YouTube events. So they'd seen me there and wanted me to do a video op-ed. The very first day, it went viral. And when they told me it went viral, I was so scared. I thought that I had introduced a virus into the internet. Now you have to remember, when I went into prison, there was no such thing as the Facebook, and I didn't know anything about internet, so just that word, virus, scared me to death. The second day, Kim Kardashian saw it, and she retweeted out, "This is so unfair." And it went from viral to super viral. Over 10 million views of that video. Kim got involved. She contacted her personal attorney, Sean Hawley. Sean Hawley contacted the prison, and I spoke with her, and the only information she gave me was that a very rich and famous woman wanted to help me get out of prison. And she asked me, would you like that? I said, let me think about it. Yeah. So anyway, Kim assembled a team. Well, let me just back up just a little bit. So I'm trying to figure out who is this famous and wealthy woman. So I had my daughter Google Kim Kardashian to tell me who her clients were. And one of her clients was, well, I'm calling them one, was the Kardashian-Jenner family. I said, I got it. It's Kris Jenner. I was telling everybody, I think Kris Jenner's getting ready to help me get out of prison. And my daughter said to me, Mama, what if it's Kim Kardashian? And I said, Kim who? She had to explain to me who she was. And a couple of days later, Sean Hawley did reveal to me that it was Kim Kardashian. I had to ask the other women there if they had magazines with Kim's picture in it, so I'd know who she was, what she looked like. And I even tore a picture out of Kim and Kanye and placed it in my Bible and started praying for them every single day. But Kim has said on many occasions that meeting me changed her life. Ever since that day that you saw me run across that road into the arms of my waiting family, I've been running ever since. Not for politics, but for people. I fulfilled the promise, and I'm still fulfilling the promise that I made to the women and the men who I left behind, that I will continue to fight for them. I've been using my voice, using my face, using my story to magnify the need of criminal justice reform. You see, I was the blessed and fortunate one to come to the attention of Kim Kardashian and for the President of the United States to set me free. And I'm very, very grateful for that. But there are so many others who are just like me, whose faces you don't see. And if I don't speak up, if I don't do something, if I don't keep reminding people that these are human beings, that these are people that need your help, they'll forget. This will just become something else. So I have not been given this platform for nothing. As Mark said, in February, I was invited as the guest of President Trump to attend his State of the Union address. As I stood up, as the president was speaking, I reflected back on that day, that time, less than a year before. I was standing up in a prison cell to be counted by prison guards. But on this day, I'm standing for a different reason. I'm standing to receive thunderous applause from everyone present in that House chambers. I could not help but shed tears because of that. In March, on March the 8th, International Women's Day, I was honored at the United Nations as a women's rights defender. I was the only one from North America to receive that honor. It came to their attention, just one of the things that I'd done while I was in prison. Just a few months after entering prison, I became a clerk in vocational technical. I taught typing, I taught computer skills, I taught interviewing skills to the women who were going to be released. I recognized and realized that people with long sentences like me were excluded from those classes. When I approached staff to ask them, why can't they come? They said, for what? They're not getting out anytime soon. How do you tell a person not to hope, not to prepare for a future, laws change. Petitions are won, so I fought for them, and I won. But it was not only just their victory. I thought that I was fighting just for the women in that prison in Dublin, but it had a far-reaching effect. That policy was changed not only for women, but for men also. So now a certain percentage of all of those type classes, they have to let people in who have long sentences. And it's a good thing that they did, because as laws changed, those women, very women and men, were thrust back out into society. But when they were thrust out, they had skills to make it, to get jobs. 3 weeks ago, I was honored to be a speaker at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee, as a part of their Catalyst for Change Distinguished Speaker Series. I can't tell you how it felt to be at the Lorraine Motel, the place where Dr. Martin Luther King lost his life, where he was assassinated. When I walked out on the balcony of the Civil Rights Museum, which was used to be the Lorraine Motel, and stood in that very spot, the last spot that Martin Luther King stood in, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Things had come full circle. When I was a young girl growing up in Olive Branch, Mississippi, Martin Luther King became one of my heroes during the Civil Rights Movement. And it was his activism that inspired me. Also, his peaceful activism carried me on through prison. So what an honor that was for me. But something incredible happened after I finished speaking. The president of the Civil Rights Museum walked up to me and asked me, "Miss Johnson, what do you think we need to do to get involved?" She recognized that this not only was, but is a movement. Then, a week later, I spoke at a YouTube space in New York. After I finished speaking there, the same thing. People came up to me with tears in their eyes, wanting to know what they could do to get involved, to do good, to do good. Then most recently, last week, I was honored to speak at the SHRM Convention in Las Vegas before over 1,800 HR professionals. You guessed it, the same thing. They came up to me, many of the people there, wanting to know how can they get involved. They said they were impacted and were now going to hiring. They were going to hire the formerly incarcerated. But not only did they want to hire the formerly incarcerated, they wanted to know how they could get involved, you guessed it, to do good. People want to stand together with us. They want to stand together with you. Everywhere I have gone, they want to know what can they do, and they're willing to do it. When I was a young child, we used to play this game called tag. We touch the person, run off quickly and say, "Tag, you're it." The person who was the it had to find someone else to tag. It was a continuous action of movement. Now, tag has taken on a very different meaning for me. I've used tag to mean taking action for good. It's a very easy thing to remember, taking action for good. And I thought about it being in black and white because there's no gray areas in doing good. I believe that there is not one person who can't take action for good. My good friend Mark Holden was tagged and he has been tagging others ever since. He's been taking action to not only reform the criminal justice system, but he's been taking action wherever he saw a need, that good needed to be done. I love this theme, greater good, because that is what is taking place now. Mark spoke in Memphis at a celebration of freedom event that I had, doing the call to action part of it. That was probably one of the most diverse groups of people that he's spoken before. People from all walks of life were there. And at the end, when he finished speaking, because some of them came up to him, and many of them are still questioning me and my sisters, what can we do to get involved in our communities? What can we do? Because they were inspired. Mark tagged them that day. Charles Koch was tagged. And he's been tagging so many others who are willing to stand with him, to join hands with him for good, to do good in our world. And he's probably tagged a lot of you here today too. Johnny Taylor has been tagged, and he's been tagging hundreds of thousands of HR professionals to get talent back to work. I've met some incredible people here in this very room. I can't call all of your names out because I'd be here all day, all night. You wouldn't even get home tonight if I named everyone. But I've seen you. I've heard the work that you're doing, and you're tagging others for good. And if you're in this audience tonight and you have not already been tagged, I say, tag, you're it.